People did not think in the fall of 1930, they did not think they were in a Great Depression. And it happens to your neighbors and it happens to your relatives. It has to have an effect on the psyche that's incredible. I think very few people know this, but or at least they don't appreciate it. But it was in September 3rd, 1929. Was extraordinary.
Warren Buffett starkly warns that significant wealth can vanish in a mere 5 minutes in the impending crash.
So the Great Depression went on, and it lasted a very long time, but it lasted a lot longer in the minds of people than it did actually in its effects. World War II came along, and on sort of an involuntary manner, we adopted Keynesianism. We started running fiscal deficits, of course, that were absolutely huge, and took our debt up to a percentage of GDP, which had never reached before, and never have reached since.
Selling your business today might invite more troubles, as Buffett emphasizes the nuanced nature of handling stocks in uncertain times.
We had an enormous economic recovery, but the minds of people had been so scarred, the memories. Parents told their children. 1929 became a symbol in people's minds. I mean, if you said 1929, it was like saying 1776 or 1492. I mean, everybody knew exactly what you were talking about.
The sage investor, Warren Buffett, reflects on the intricate role of an analyst in navigating the complexities of the market.
It's been true all along. It may have been interrupted with the scariest of scenarios, when you had with one group of states fighting another group of states. And it may have been tested again in the Great Depression, and it may be tested now to some degree. But in the end, the answer is never bet against America. And that, in my view, is as true today as it was in 1789, and even was true during the Civil War and the depths of the Depression.
Buffett challenges the practice of making decisions based on sensational headlines, urging investors to view stocks as ownership in real businesses.
Most people like to buy with non-recourse in real estate, and one time I asked Charlie, there was some real estate guy we were talking to, and how do they decide how much a building like this is worth? And the answer is it's whatever they can borrow without signing their name.
Offering practical tips, Buffett imparts wisdom on prudent strategies to weather the storm of market turbulence.
They thought it was a recession, very much like had occurred at least a dozen times, although not always when stock markets were important. But we'd had many recessions in the United States over the time, and this did not look like it was something dramatically out of the ordinary.
Buffett draws on the importance of resilience and certain qualities individuals must possess to endure economic downturns.
If you look at real estate generally, you'll understand what the phenomena that's happening if you remind yourself that that's the attitude of most people that have become big in the real estate business, and it does mean then that the lenders are the ones that get the property, and of course they don't want the property usually, so then the real estate operator counts on negotiating with them, and the banks tend to extend and pretend, and there's all kinds of activities that arrive out of commercial real estate development, which occurs on a big scale, but it all has consequences, and I think we are starting to see the consequences of people who could borrow at 2.5% and find out it doesn't work at current rates, and they hand it back to somebody that gave them all the money they needed to build it.
Reflecting on the past, Buffett recalls instances of companies with inflated ratios and deceptive practices in the lead-up to financial crises.
In 1929, my dad, who was 26 years of age then, was employed as a securities salesman by a local small bank. And he sold stocks and bonds, but he sold stocks. And when stocks fall 48%, and you were selling them to people a few months ago, you really don't feel like going out and facing those same people. So I think my dad probably elected to do, as they say now, shelter in place, which means stay at home. And there really wasn't that much in our house. We just had a small yard. It was wintertime anyway. My dad wouldn't have been puttering on the yard anyway. And there really wasn't, the television wasn't there. And he and my mother got along very well. So under those conditions, if you'll turn to the next slide, I was born about 9 months later. So, but at that time, I was actually born on August 30th, but the stock market was closed that day, and so I'm using the previous day's figures. But it wasn't, I didn't notice at the time that the market was closed, but the stock market had actually recovered over 20% during that 9.5-month period or thereabouts.
Addressing the dividend dilemma, Warren Buffett unveils the rationale behind Berkshire Hathaway's stance on dividend payments.
Actually, for about 10 days after my birth, that view held on, and the stock market actually managed to go up all of 1 or 2% there in those 10 days. But that's the last day. Well, from that point, if you'll turn to the next slide, the stock market went from a level of 240 to 41, which was a noticeable decline because if somebody had given me $1,000 on the day I was born and I'd bought stocks with it and bought the Dow average, my $1,000 would have become $170 in less than 2 years. And that is something that none of us ever experienced. That we may have had it with one stock occasionally, but in terms of having a broad range of America marked down 83% in 2 years, and marked down 89% of the peak.
In the face of the impending crash, Buffett predicts a landscape ripe with opportunities for those who can discern and act wisely.
In that intervening period, less than 1 year after I was born, just slightly less than 1 year, my dad went to the bank where he worked and had his account, and of course, the bank had a sign on it closed, and so he had no job. And he had 2 kids at that point, and his father had a grocery store, but Charlie and I both worked for my grandfather. Charlie worked there in 1940. I worked there in 1941, so we didn't know each other. But my grandfather said to my father that, don't worry about your groceries, Howard. He says, I'll just let your bill run. That was my grandfather. Not exactly. He cared about his family, but he wasn't going to go.
Buffett's historical perspective highlights the potential wealth creation in the insurance sector, underscoring the significance of strategic acumen in uncertain times.
One of the things as I look back on that period is, and I don't think economists generally like to give it that much of a point of importance, but if we'd had the FDIC 10 years earlier, the FDIC started on January 1st, 1934. It was part of the sweeping legislation that took place when Roosevelt came in. But if we'd had the FDIC, we would have had a much, much different experience, I believe, in the Great Depression. But if you have over 4,000 banks fail, that's 4,000 local experiences where people save and save and save and put their money away, and then someday they reach for it and it's gone. And that happens, in all 48 states.
Charlie once said to me when I was leaving his house a few months ago, I was visiting him. We talked for a couple of hours, and I said to Charlie as I left, there wasn't anybody else in the house. And I said, except one daughter. And I said, Charlie, I'll just keep doing what we've been doing. And Charlie said, without looking up or pausing a second, he said, that's all you know how to do, Warren. Yeah.
One very, very, very good thing that came out of the Depression, in my view, is the FDIC. And it would have been a somewhat different world, I'm sure, if the bank failures hadn't just rolled across this country and with people that thought that they were savers found out that they had nothing when they went there, and there was a sign that said closed. Incidentally, the FDIC, but the FDIC has not cost the American taxpayer a dime. I mean, its expenses have been paid, its losses have been paid, all through assessments on banks. It's been a mutual insurance company of the banks, backed by the federal government and associated with the federal government. But now it holds $100 billion, and that consists of premiums that were paid in and investment income on the premiums, less the expenses and paying of all the losses. And think of the incredible amount of peace of mind that's given to people that were not similarly situated in when the Great Depression hit. It was January 4th of 1951 that the kid who was born on August 30th in 1930 had finished college before the stock market got back to where it was at that earlier time. So take the years from 1930, or 1929, really, to 1951, or take the year from my birth, 20 years, and bear in mind that, the country was only 140 years old when this started. That's 20 years out of this amazing 231-year lifetime of our country that was flat out, a time for a long time of no economic growth and no feeling by people in terms about the wealth of the country, about what the American economy was worth, what all these corporations that were doing far, far, far better than they were long ago. But it took all of that time to restore in the market a price level that was equal to what it was when I was born 20 years earlier.